Welcome to Xbox Corner, my name is Alex and today we're taking a look at Callisto Protocol on the Xbox Series X, the latest sci-fi horror experience from the team behind Dead Space. The similarities, they are clear, but can it not only stand up to past efforts, but can it go above and beyond? Well, that's what I'm here to find out as we look at story, gameplay, frame rate, graphics and audio, so hit subscribe, join us here for reviews, deals, Game Pass breakdowns and graphical comparisons weekly, and let's get started. If you are picking up the Callisto Protocol then and you decide to go digital, consider using cornershop.gg for discounted Xbox Store digital credit. You'll get 10% off at checkout using code CORNER. With this video then, I will warn you, it is an incredibly violent game, often brutal, so do expect imagery in this video that's definitely been dialed back, but you still have been warned. We will also have a Series X and S graphical comparison for this game as well. Find that in the pinned comment below. Story then here, and we find events taking place 300 years into the future, and we will take on the role of Jacob Lee, a pilot on a routine delivery mission with a crewmate. Now in the opening moments we are exiting this location, Black Iron Prison, but things are about to go sideways quickly. Basically, we discover we've been boarded, we crash land after, let's say, a scurry, and after a brief interaction and a few brutal deaths in this crash, we are being incarcerated. It seems essentially we are mistaken for someone else, or there's something that we do not know. Shortly after, we get an electronic device implanted in our neck, that is our health bar, the green line you will see throughout the video. We do, however, flatline here, and finally, we awake in our cell and uncover, essentially, all things have gone to hell and humans, they are turning into monsters around us. We've also befriended another individual to aid in our escape. It's definitely a quick moving story, that is for sure, but yeah, look, it's good stuff. I wouldn't call it original, but it's got a huge amount of intrigue and it's constantly keeping you guessing. Gameplay then under this one, much like their prior effort, Dead Space, it's a third-person survival horror experience, and the controls for that reason, they are simple. I will add here quickly though, Jacob's not the most light on his feet as characters go, but it definitely feels right, especially when you're trading blows with the local monsters, and his force in his swings, they appear to be something to be reckoned with. The gameplay loop though simple, it's all about exploration and then hitting narrative beats along the way in what is a mostly linear environment. The jail though makes for a unique setting. It's a dark place filled with horror that has a particularly bleak undertone from the opening moments of the game. You know, with or without the monsters, this is essentially a place for evil to go. This location though, it's on Jupiter's moon as well, and it's filled with locations to explore, including even the occasional branching pathway, though this is typically for the sake of much needed items. I will add here as well, it's not just endless corridors either, you will find yourselves in wide open spaces, even outdoors. I do want to quickly address difficulty then as well before we get into the rest of this video, but it packs 3 difficulty modes as well as options for adjusting aim and movement sensitivity alongside inverting axes. You can also dial up and dial down aim assist if you need that extra layer of help. I mentioned difficulty though here because it is a particularly brutal experience at moments and you will die constantly. From beginning to end, and I think this is where they succeed the most, I'd describe it as I felt more capable as I progressed and more well equipped even to deal with the monsters, but I was never overpowered. I always felt moments away from death, and that's how it should be given the survival tag they've attached to the name. Movement though, as I say, like simple, we have the motion, we can move and aim or attack at the same time, and we can interact, think climbing up walls, picking up items, and that's all done with a single face button. Combat though, that's where it really gets interesting. It has a large focus on melee combat this one, but I did find the deeper I got, the more I became reliant on ranged combat as well. That is of course bullet permitting. They're not exactly showering you with ammo here, so I did find I was sparing where possible. The most enjoyable part of the combat here though, it's actually constantly because it's just evolving. You know, initially we learn to swing, then we uncover we can block with slight damage taken, then we can actually dodge simply holding the left stick to the left or the right, and reversing for each incoming motion. The latter there, honestly, I didn't enjoy it at first. It felt sluggish, even a little unresponsive, I guess, but I persevered, and what I discovered was a combat system that I ended up loving. I just needed practice, it's new. It's simply something I'm not used to. By the end of the game, in fact, some of these combat encounters felt more rewarding than many I've encountered in recent memory. That said though, I know I'm praising it there, but I will say that very much goes for one-on-one encounters. In groups, not quite as satisfying. There were moments where it felt the game was unsure which enemy to lock onto, and the camera, it can get a little wild in these moments. Even then though, the pros, they outweigh the cons, and I learned to leverage firearms in these scenarios more frequently, particularly the shotgun. The guns then, it's not a huge amount on offer. A pistol, a shotgun, a riot gun as a few examples, but each have their moments, and as you do uncover them, they are fun to experiment with. As a warning though, it will take you a good while to uncover each of the weapons, even the starting pistol, never mind the rest of the lineup, that takes probably a couple of hours. My only real complaint with the guns really, just the lack of, I guess, the fun that we found in Dead Space. If you remember the Ripper, which tore enemies to pieces, we still have that same idea around, dismembering these monsters, but none of the weapons felt quite as satisfying at a core level. Where it did satisfy though, get a good couple of swings in and a reticle actually appears on screen over your foe. This is going to be targeting a core organ or a body part. Consider it a bonus almost for good performance, but in these moments just watch those limbs fly and it never gets old. This becomes particularly useful in the latter game when enemies can actually transform into even stronger forms. This is represented when tentacles start to come out of them. This will be absolutely essential too, because even in the early game, if an enemy has one arm swinging instead of two, it's going to be a whole lot less to worry about. Finally, for weapons, you will find upgrade stations during your exploration. Now these weapons, they have an upgrade path. You'll be able to do everything from upgrade strength to stability to ammo count. Additionally, we do get a glove of sorts as well. This essentially gives us the ability to levitate enemies and fire them off in any given direction, or even environmental pieces, pick them up and basically leverage them to be a force to reckon with. This is just particularly fun and brutal though when walls here are covered in blades, spikes, moving mechanical pieces, and these will just decimate our enemies. This weapon as well, this glove, it also has upgrades. The final element of attacks in a stomp, lifted straight from Dead Space, but everybody loved it, and it's about as satisfying as it's always been. This thing makes enemies just explode, and we'll want to do this to stop a transformation potentially from occurring. They basically become more powerful in those moments, but also to uncover pickups after you take one down. The main pickups you want to find though, credits to spend, health to regen, with a handy press down of the D-pad to do that, and then finally bullets. We also have a limited inventory system, but it does expand with progression. Finally though, the rest of the package, levels, enemies. I like the design. We do get outdoors, as I said, so it's not a constant slew of corridors here. And the enemies, they can come from every direction. They particularly are fond of, different vents around each of these different rooms. With the focus on melee combat here though, I will say it's not quite as threatening maybe as they could have been, as there's very few with projectile attacks, and those attack patterns, they're somewhat simple to read. It's just a game though that's so punishing if, even a single connection occurs. The only other thing I don't really like with the enemies, there's a couple that feel cheap, slug-like enemies, just difficult to react to given their size. They latch on, cause damage. Others just simply instantly attack with no chance to react, and then some even hide in lockers and other searchable items, causing kind of cheap, unavoidable damage, which, yeah, look, it's just a little unnecessary in what is an already punishing world. Before we do get to the frame rate then, look, for the gameplay, as a fan of Dead Space, this was very much what I expected, and while it has some flaws in design, no question, I still found it really well done. The combat, it's heavy, the exploration intriguing, and the small amount of weapons and abilities, they're definitely fun to experiment with. Frame rate then, and look, here's the big problem for me. First off, we get two modes, quality and performance. Quality is 30 frames per second, but pushing the game visually with 4K. Performance, that's going to be 60 FPS. Now, I played mostly in quality. I wanted to see this world as graphically intended. Sadly though, it's not stable. The first couple of hours are fine, but then we start to see drops, and I'd describe them as pretty frequent. Now most drops I'd call them a minor, amount, but I did see as low as 24 as per the footage you are watching currently, which I will admit was a particularly bad moment in the experience. Now, a few things could be at play here. Visually, it's extremely demanding, clearly, from the huge amount of effects. But I also think it's because the game rarely has a load screen outside of elevators that mask it, or brief moments where the game, the screen fades to black. I also then did test this same moment on performance mode, the 60 FPS mode, and while that is definitely true, we still get drops at the exact same moments, but here they are even more aggressive. I was seeing down as low as 40. This for me is a problem because it breaks the immersion, and that's what horror absolutely relies on. Far from put me off the game, but it's definitely worth anticipating going in. Graphically then, there's no question it's stunning. The detail in this world, another level. Each location just so well realised, and then the use of small elements to reflect and suggest horror, it is award worthy. From small metallic corridors to cold cells to wide open vistas in outer space, it's a world that it absolutely makes sense, and even the slew of deadly obstacles like spikes on the wall, they somehow make that kind of, make sense in this environment. Character animations then are just as strong, and the subtle camera shift for combat, such a great way of switching up the control scheme to add in those dodge mechanics. The attacks as well, they look particularly brutal, especially though the finishers, and you will see these a lot, but you will not want to skip them. It's going to be your life or theirs, but I tell you what, some of these moments, I haven't seen anything quite like it, quite as brutal in a game in such a long time. I can't even count how many times I died, but it always had this kind of brutal surprise for me. Problems and the occasional bit of popping, and just occasionally as well, transitioning locations. I had this issue a couple of times where basically the world wasn't quite loading in, or at least from a distance. These were, however, extremely infrequent. The highlight though for visuals, lighting, it directs your path, adds a whole new dynamic to the terror, and it was by far my favourite, or one of my favourite elements of the game. Audio finally, and this was the other big winner for me. Just audio drives horror, it adds the tension, it adds the scares, and they knew exactly what to deliver, from ominous music that's more tonality over anything else, to the sound of monsters in the distance putting you on the edge of your seat. This sound design, it just gave me something at all times to be nervous about. It's topped off then with Hollywood casted voice work that is just incredibly well done. So overall, the Callisto Protocol, it's an incredibly well-realised survival horror experience that has a few shortcomings and quirks. The world's stunning, as is the exploration, and the narrative intrigue kept me going throughout. The combat mostly good, but in crowds not quite as rewarding as it could have been. And then the visuals and the audio incredibly well-realised, and it brings this nightmare to life. The biggest fault for me, however, it's the frame rate. The fluctuation actually surprised me to see this on Series X, but it's worth knowing it's also present on PS5 as well. It's going to need a patch because as it stands, it absolutely hurts the immersion. Then there's some minor ones too, think like the cheap enemies and some of the popping that occurs, but I really don't think that takes all of that much away from what is this, survival horror experience. Otherwise though, look, you like sci-fi horror, survival, or even third-person horror, then you should probably be taking a look, especially if, like me, you loved you some Dead Space. Today, it's a good 7 out of 10 from me, and a quick frame rate patch here, I'd probably be pushing this to a great 8 out of 10. That said, I'm already psyched now to jump back in and go for that highest difficulty level. Will you be adding this one to the library then? Let me know in the comments below. With that then, hit subscribe, join us here for reviews, deals, Game Pass breakdowns, and graphical comparisons weekly, and I'll see you all on the next video. Thanks everyone.